Joining us today is journalist and historian Jonathan Alter. He's the author of His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us today.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to begin, first of all, with your reaction to Jimmy Carter's passing. You knew him quite well. I'm curious what went through your mind these past couple of days.
Well, I think it was a real loss for the country and for the world. He was a moral exemplar of how to lead an exemplary life, where you're ambitious not just for yourself, but to help other people. And this was a true life of service. It was an epic American story that he completed with his wife, Rosalind, who died a year ago. And I think that Jimmy Carter offered a kind of master class on how to make every minute of your life count. And so that's what I was thinking about when he died, which was, what lessons can I draw from his life to be a better person?
So much has been made not only of his presidency, but of his post-presidency. And I'm kind of curious, what drove you to write the biography on him?
Well, actually, it was a feeling that there was more to know about his presidency, that there was a kind of an easy shorthand that you hear everywhere, mediocre president, great former president. And I knew him a little bit from my work at Newsweek over the years, and I realized there was more to the story than that, and that cliche was only half true. That actually, while he was a political failure as president, he got shellacked by Ronald Reagan. He was a substantive and often visionary success as president, and that story had not been told. So I think that my main motive for writing His Very Best was that Jimmy Carter was arguably the most misunderstood president in American history.
Well, and to that point, in your book, you really kind of underscore that whole idea of being misunderstood. And you argue that, he's the only president since Thomas Jefferson who could truly be called a Renaissance man. And I'm wondering, can you elaborate on that?
Well, I ended up counting up 28 skills that he had. And people know he was a farmer, but he was also a nuclear engineer. He was an inventor of farm equipment. He was an agronomist. He was a land use planner. He was, obviously in politics, in the state senate, governor, and president. But even during that time, he developed the skills of a diplomat, a first-class diplomat, which we saw at Camp David and then in other places as well. And then, after leaving the presidency, he indulged some of his other interests. He was a master woodworker, not only great on a Habitat for Humanity work site where he was, the best workman on the site, but built all the furniture in his house. And then he wrote 30 books on his different interests after leaving office. He was an expert fly fisherman. And he wrote a novel. He wrote a book of poetry. He became a skilled memoirist. He even wrote a children's book. So he was constantly testing himself, trying to develop these other skills that he could broaden himself and broaden his interests, even as he's, eradicating diseases and promoting democracy and engaging in really significant conflict resolution as part of the Carter Center. So this was an extraordinary man who went on an extraordinary journey from barefoot boy in Archery, Georgia, even smaller than planes, fly speck on the map, to global icon. No electricity, running water when he's a boy. And then, by the end of his life, he's actually back in African villages where there's no running water or electricity, trying to help them avoid some of the problems that especially afflicted Carter's black neighbors growing up. So in some sense, his human rights campaign, which was extraordinarily influential in ending the Cold War and in moving a number of dictatorships to democracy, that was an extension of the civil rights movement, and the human rights connection was also connected to his influence in from his mother, his interest in global health. His mother was a nurse. So it all fit together for him to be not just a Renaissance man, but a world-class humanitarian.
I am curious, what do you think would surprise people the most about Jimmy Carter?
Um, I think they'd maybe be most surprised by what he's like when he's not on camera and smiling or making jokes on late night television. So I asked one of his sons, Jeff, if you could use one word to describe your father, what would it be? And he said, intense. And that was what I found in my interactions with Jimmy Carter. He's very intense, very focused, not humorless, but very focused on what he was doing. And whatever he was doing, he was going to do his very best, which is why that's the title of my book. From the time when he was interviewing for a job in the nuclear navy with Admiral Hyman Rickover, who built these nuclear-powered submarines that Colin Powell said won the Cold War. Uh, from that time when he was being interviewed, the admiral asked him, where'd you finish in your class at the Naval Academy? And Carter had finished 39th out of a class of 650. And Admiral Rickover said, did you do your best? And Carter said, no, I guess I didn't always do my best. And Rickover like swiveled around in the chair. Why not your best? And the interview was over. And he thought he hadn't gotten into the nuclear navy, this elite program, but Rickover let him in because of his honesty and brilliance. And my argument is that for the 51 years since then, Jimmy Carter has always done his best. He has, excuse me, I said 51. I got my math wrong. 70, 73 years since then. He's always been all in on whatever he was doing. And he has always done his best, whether he was, fishing or making peace between Egypt and Israel. And that intensity, that commitment, that determination to spread a message of peace and service through his acts, through deeds, through hard work, not just making nice speeches. That's part of his legacy, that he acted on his deep faith. And you don't see that very often. I remember at one point Andrew Young, who was very, very complimentary of Jimmy Carter and reveres him. And Andrew Young, the great civil rights leader and aide to Dr. Martin Luther King, he said one of the things you feel when you're with Jimmy Carter is a little bit inadequate because none of us can do what he did, along with Rosalind Carter, to help improve the lot of humanity. But we can try and we can be inspired by him. And when he got his Nobel Prize, the Nobel Committee drew on a portion of scripture that is about trying, just trying to do your best. And that was kind of the essence of what he thought he was put on earth to do.
As we round out our interview, with his passing, we're seeing younger generations who might not be all that familiar with him begin to learn, and maybe they're beginning to learn through your book. And I'm curious, in a nutshell, what's your hope for the reader if they pick up your book?
Well, it's quite interesting because, older readers, they remember some of his many shortcomings as president, and I detail them, even though I think he was an underrated president. Younger readers who don't know his presidency firsthand, they just find him a tremendously inspirational figure. And I think especially at this time, because Jimmy Carter stood for decency. And there's still millions of decent Americans who believe that we need to return to a sense of character in our politics. And, we might have to wait a while before we get there, but we can come back to that. That's how Jimmy Carter was first elected president. He came out of nowhere. When he said he was running for president, his mother said, "President of what?" And he went all the way to the White House after Watergate and Vietnam, when people had lost faith in institutions. And Carter said, "We can do better than this." And I think his example is such that, young people, old people, people in between can have hope for a better day where we return to what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature.
All right. Journalist, historian, and author Jonathan Alter, certainly appreciate your time and your expertise today. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.